the Undersecretary of the Navy during World War I, just like Teddy Roosevelt was at the beginning of the Spanish-American War. But he would be the nominee for vice president in 1920. Pretty fast jump, but they lost the Harding. But this guy's going places. The assumption was this up-and-coming politician will win a big seat in New York, and who knows? And then in 1922, he went to upstate Maine along the coast for a combination vacation and political stop. There was a Boy Scout jamboree nearby, one of those things where politicians go by and wave, aren't I a man of the people? And after a day of swimming, he went to his home and felt really bad, went to bed. Woke up a few hours later in absolute pain and panic. He basically was paralyzed from the neck down. And at least he was diagnosed with what? Polio looked like it hit him. And the thing about polio was, it's a horrible, terrifying disease. But in the 1920s, that was every parent's greatest fear, that their kid would contract polio, especially because polio hit younger people hardest. But the thing about polio, what made it so terrifying, was how random it was. The polio virus might survive on, let's say, a doorknob that someone touched for days. And hundreds of people could touch it, but only one person get it. So that made it just more scary because it could be anybody. And then how people reacted were different for every person. Some people could kill them. Some people paralyzed from the neck down. Some people, maybe after a month of having like a really, really bad flu, you're basically okay. And every parent saw that. And that random nature made it more terrifying. In fact, the symbol of that era, a terrifying symbol for every parent especially, was the iron lung. You know what an iron lung is? Yeah, like a cylinder. Yeah, and basically it has a little motor in it that will press a board on your chest. In, out, so you can breathe. Because you're paralyzed from the neck down. And basically you're in there until you die. That, unimaginable. And that was everybody's fear. So when Roosevelt contracted this, everybody, they knew. That was like this person who seemed to be going place with this great name, and now he's done. And that's what he kind of felt like. He's catched the bit where he said, "If I've been afraid of fire," well, you really see now, no, why now? No. And so, in about a month and a half, he basically regained feelings above the waist. Now, I don't have to say above the waist, so above here. Now, you stand, it's your hips that hold you up. In fact, those are your biggest ones, so you don't even feel it. You're just so naturally you do it. So we lost that. And they're talking about him rehabilitating, going to Georgia. This place got warm springs, swimming in the healing pools. But this great career over. And then in 1928, at the Democratic Convention, Roosevelt made his comeback and would give the nominating address for Al Smith. Remember Al Smith, the Catholic nominee? He's one I played you a little tape of him. It sounded like the cartoon gangster. Roosevelt gave the speech, but not just that. This man, who everybody knew what happened to him, walked across the stage to the podium, stood at the podium for nearly an hour, gave his speech, and then walked out. Sure, he had his son and a cane. So his son holding his arm and using his son to brace on for a little bit of support, but he walked. That was like a lightning bolt. He beat polio. It was like, he beat it. People are paralyzed. They're paralyzed. You don't come out of it. And he came out of it. He did it. Heck, if he beat polio, what's the depression? I mean, that's a real, that was a feeling everyone had. So, how do you do it? First off, I should add, it appears as though they might have misdiagnosed him. He might not have had polio. He might have had an autoimmune disorder, and they still don't really know how those work today. But it reacted like polio. That's what it could have had. There's a couple things that seemed like that was it, but still, same net effect. Everybody did. He thought he had polio. We know how he did it? Without hip muscles? But even brace muscles, what holds you up? He worked and worked and worked and worked and was determined he was going to do it. And so what he did is he worked his upper body, especially his abs, his abdominals, his oblique muscles. They're not near as big as your hips, not even close, but he used those to stand. And so it would be tiring. You do it first just a couple minutes and then you're just exhausted. We can't do it because we're just so used to it. Just our hips, you can't even try to hold yourself up with your, and then using the same muscles. Start with, those with two railings, you're using that. Then eventually using both sons. He would hold their arm like this so he could brace on them. Then eventually a cane. He would use his hip muscles with his brace, because the braces would lock if the leg's straight, to kind of throw his whole body out. Like that. And that's how he walked. Slow, but he walked. Got to the podium, locked the braces, held them up with his muscles, and then worked at not. Can you imagine how exhausting that would be? They all worked on smiling and acting like they're just out for a stroll. And they're just in agony. And they did it. So he could walk to the podium. He beat polio. And photographers had discretion. Reporters did. They never showed him being carried into the car. They showed him driving around. He drove all the time. He had the controls on the steering column. You've probably seen, maybe some of you have seen those. They're pretty cool. I've tried to drive one. It's a little weird trying to use the brake right there, but he drove really fast. But he could drive around. They never showed him in his wheelchair. And if he was in his wheelchair, the only pictures have it with his shawl covering the wheels, because there was such discrimination against people with that disability. And there still is a lot, but not near as much as then. And it was a pretty amazing thing. It's also sad that he felt the need to have to hide that, but that was the reality of the time, which is too bad. But what an amazing feat. And so he did it. There's one little bit of film where you can see the entire walk. There's a few pieces of footage, like going to Washington, then it used to be called the Senators baseball team, throwing out the first pitch. And you can see his hips move. Another one of his inauguration. But this is just one little clip where you can see this whole leg, and it's amazing. And it's really cool. And there's a guy with a cigar who pops his hand in. So it's kind of funny, but that's the way it goes.
And it was showbiz, but it worked.
See it? Look at his leg. You really see his hips swing? Doesn't look like his knees are moving.
Only 4 seconds of film exist which clearly show the walk Franklin so tirelessly practiced.
So we only show slow motion, we really see it. See his hip turn?
The goal really was simply to take enough steps to get from a car into a building, or from his seat on the stage to the podium and back again. If he could.
Isn't that just absolutely amazing? And that would be this illusion. Oh, I should add one more thing. He also promised to repeal prohibition. America needs a drink. But they also said, you start brewing beer, you start distilling alcohol, jobs. Jobs. Yeah. So there was an economic argument to it. And people just were not even paying attention to the laws. That's why I was breaking down by then. But let's get back to this. He would win a landslide election. But what was his slogan called again? The New Deal wasn't really planned. It kind of was. But when he got the nomination, he went to the nominating convention. In fact, he was the first president to go. He flew from Albany when he heard he got it on the 3rd vote. And here's a cartoon of it. It's hard to read because it's pretty pixelated, but it's Roosevelt. And you think, okay, plane, whatever. In 1932, that was a big deal. That was this new wonder technology, passenger liners. And it made it seem like he's new, exciting, different. He wasn't the only politician to use planes for that way. But that idea of change really is an effective tool. You know, they sell products with that, the new, improved, and all that stuff. Well, just in the store the other day, the new thing to clean teeth are like putting charcoal in the toothpaste. And I thought, what a total, complete gimmick. But it sounds new and exciting. It might work, I don't know, but it's, maybe it does work. Wow, okay, it works. But even though the other politician who did it, they made posters of it. Hitler over Germany. Didn't work. He did not win the election for president, but that's just when the Nazis were starting to get bigger and bigger, and then fear of communism. Well, and then at the speech he said, I pledge myself to a New Deal for the American people. And that New Deal stuck. It piggybacked on, remember, Teddy Roosevelt's Square Deal. And the big thing was, unlike Hoover's policies, and all these policies were, well, like the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, we need to help the wealthy more so they can start building. Here, he said, I'm going to have aggressive action for average people. Hard to read, but it says the forgotten man. And what, not only was it an effective political tool when people felt they're being ignored, Roosevelt, unlike a lot of politicians, really meant it. And he came up with an aggressive, radical idea, very radical, of direct government action to help people. The government, that we have a role to protect people. And this goes back to the populists, this goes back to the progressives, but now there's a president. And he was elected, landslide victory, but a lot of it was an anti-Hoover vote. And then all hell broke loose. Almost immediately after the election, a series of food riots began in big cities like Detroit, Akron, Chicago, Newark. Food riots, basically starving people in the cities didn't have food. And then the next month, it was on the farms. In Iowa, farmers started taking over cities and burning foreclosure notes. Farmers actually took over Sioux City, Iowa, and created a farmers' collective. This looked like revolution. The most popular figures in America were two bank robbers / gangsters, Pretty Boy Floyd and John Dillinger. Why? Because they're attacking banks. Sometimes they burn up the mortgages so people wouldn't have to pay the debt anymore. This is kind of bad if bank robbers are heroes, right? Things are falling apart. And then in February, you get this now, the entire financial system of the country broke down. Just broke down. Think about Roosevelt sitting there like, now I'm president, but he's president-elect and watches everything fall apart like Lincoln did. Like Lincoln did with secession. By the way, this financial disaster hit Germany a month and a half earlier, and that's when the coalition of parties passed Hitler to form a government. It's kind of weird how they came to power so close to each other, and they're such polar opposites. And Roosevelt, he can't do anything. Hoover tried to get Roosevelt to commit to basically doing everything that Hoover wanted. He tried to get Roosevelt to promise to govern with austerity, stay on the gold standard, let banks do what they want. He tried to get quit spending money, and Roosevelt refused. In fact, Roosevelt was mad, and Hoover was mad. He refused. And out of this is going to come one of the biggest myths in American history. There's a myth pushed by Hoover that Roosevelt refused to come out publicly on Hoover's great plan to solve the crisis because Roosevelt wanted all the political credit for himself. And that is simply not true. Hoover tried to coerce him to govern like Hoover, to promise to govern like Hoover. We have the letters, they're all there. And you think, okay, whatever, that's a big deal. No, this has great effect. People think this to this day. I've read this to this day. I can vividly remember when a president in your lifetime took over when the economy was in literal free fall. Who? President Obama. And while he was president-elect, he said, I will not be like Roosevelt, and I will work with the previous president. He said that. He pushed the myth. And that's a pretty dangerous myth. And so that's why I mentioned that. Myths, this is he didn't know. He didn't have any idea. He just was misinformed and was wrong. He's a very intelligent man. And myths like that persist in all sorts of things, and they're dangerous. Well, when he was inaugurated, people were paying attention. I almost forgot. While he was president-elect, the most famous and terrifying failed assassination attempts also took place. Roosevelt went to a couple places while he was president-elect, including Miami.
Hey, Gibbs.
Okay, next time let's knock, but.
Sorry, what is that?
Next time knock.
Just no. Right now?
No, wait.
Okay.
What's it for? Okay, so Roosevelt was at he's giving a speech at a dinner in Miami Beach. And there was a man named Giuseppe Zangara. And Zangara was an Italian immigrant whose stomach hurt. Why did his stomach hurt? Because the capitalists led by Roosevelt are attacking his stomach. I'm not kidding, that's what he believed. So he decided he's going to kill Roosevelt. And he was about 5 foot tall, so he couldn't see when he stood up where the seats where they had these kind of benches, little wooden chairs. So he jumped up on a chair, pulled out a pistol, and from about 15 feet away, aimed at Roosevelt. And just when he fired, the little rickety chair buckled. And he missed Roosevelt by about 3 feet and mortally wounded the mayor of Chicago, who was there. And that was a tragedy that I can't even imagine what would have happened to the country if Roosevelt would have been assassinated. That would have looked like someone who was doing a coup, and I don't think the country would have made it. That's one of the most consequential failed assassinations in history. That's pretty scary. That's like a wow moment.
So they were pretty sad because he was hungry? Is that why?
No, he just
Oh,
was insane.
okay.
Yeah, and he'd be arrested and put into an asylum and would turn to be a model prisoner. And he was nuts. I mean, but he had a gun. So, with that, Roosevelt took office, and when he gave the inauguration, yeah, that's actually a good answer because he was hungry. No, he just thought aiming beams into his stomach or something. So when he gave his inaugural address, he sincerely believed, and Roosevelt knew, that people were going to be paying attention, and he was right. The banking system was in crisis. It looked like the edge of revolution. He knew he had to say the right things and give the attitude that, I know you're suffering, I know you're afraid. And remember when I talked about that, the loss of confidence, how people begin to blame themselves and the system and all that? I know. You're not lying, but we can get out of this. He had to do this. So much of it was attitude. So we're going to play just a little bit more of... This is from a different one of that series on the Great Depression. Now, this one talks about New York, and it mentions LaGuardia, who was the the mayor of New York City. He was a Republican. An airport be named after him a little bit later.
1933, the homeless and the poor lost an advocate in Congress. Defeated in a Democratic landslide, LaGuardia returned to a New York where victims of the Depression camped in cardboard shanties.
Largest Hoover bill in America.
LaGuardia swore he would give up politics, but few believed he would stay on the sidelines if Roosevelt's New Deal could help the city of New York.
History turns a page. President and Mrs. Hoover, leaving the White House after 4 trying years, greet Mrs. Roosevelt on the portico. The president-elect awaits them in the car in which he and Mr. Hoover will ride to the Capitol together. Retiring president and the new, the man who bore the burdens and the man who now assumes them.
So Hoover was furious. He hated Roosevelt, hated him even more after he wouldn't do exactly what Hoover wanted. He didn't want to go to the inauguration. There's only been 2 presidents to not go to the inauguration of their successor. Do you remember? The Adamses, John and John Quincy, would not go to their successor's inauguration. And they convinced him that would look horrible if you do this in these dangerous times. But he's mad. Now, Roosevelt he just had that incredible charm. He could charm anybody. He remembered everybody's name. He could talk to them, just make them feel good. The old story was that people would walk in while he was president, people he'd never met before. And there'd be 2 people, for example. One person had a certain point of view on a topic. They'd go in and talk to Roosevelt for 5 minutes. I'd never met him before. And they would walk out with 2 things on their mind. Number 1, I have a new best friend. And it's Franklin Roosevelt. Number 2, he completely agrees with me. The next guy could come in, total opposite point of view. Walk out thinking 2 things. I have a new best friend who totally agrees with me. So he thought he could charm Hoover. And so Hoover sat down, he was mad. Sat down next to him, and Roosevelt started talking to him, and Hoover just wouldn't even look at him. Kind of acknowledge him, then look straight. Start driving. This is from what Roosevelt's son Curtis said. They got a little bit further, and Roosevelt's still trying to initiate conversation. Finally, this is all Hoover did. Like this, looked at Roosevelt and went, ah! And that was it. Then Roosevelt just waved to the crowd.
An historical moment in the life of a nation is approaching.
Heard a couple times Hoover talk. Listen to Roosevelt.
I shall ask the Congress for the one remaining instrument
to meet the crisis. Broad executive power to wage a war against the emergency, as great as the power that would be given to me if we were in fact invaded by a foreign foe.
And he had a great patrician voice. He sounded like he's going to do something. He sounded sincere. Think how good that sounded on the radio. And this is the thing. He said, we're going to treat it like war. We're not going to say, hey, we'll let the economy adjust. No, we are going to mobilize the economy and we're going to make your lives better. What's the most famous line from his speech? All of you know it. Say it again. Think about the way people were thinking. Exactly right. He said this. He said, I'm not, right in the first paragraph, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm going to tell you the truth. I understand. This great nation will endure as it has endured and will revive and will prosper. So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. Now, you hear nothing to fear but fear itself, which all of you probably heard. It's like, okay, whatever. But put it in the context of the time. And what he's saying is, I understand. I know what you're going through, and we're going to do something about it. To a lot of people, it's like, thank you. Now, what the problem with that is, okay, that's him. Now he's got to do something. That will be Monday, right after the brainstorm list and thesis on the events leading up to the Revolutionary War. Huh? And Yellow Submarine, what? Yeah, that's one of the big reasons that, hey, they tried to make a submarine you're almost on the right track, yeah. No, they tried those too. Yeah, they thought they could strap bombs and have to go under a ship and they'd blow them up. But in the Revolutionary War, they tried a submarine. They have a long pole. They thought they could ram the whole on the ship.
Oh, yeah. Not like a pirate, they just have like spikes on the ship.
Well, they would be, they always have, but pirates would be
Like the shield and like
and he had that kid's Boston is called Mandarin, where he has the unique Boston voice that Kennedy has. It fit the same kind of stuff. And he was a very talented culture. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. All we do is I'm going to give an essay about that. No, we're just starting. So are you going to just do a brainstorm list? Remember the French War?
Yeah.
And then
Oh,
I'm just yeah. And it's a good way to review and also work on it. Yeah, you just asked me about oh, question mark. That was good here, but
I know. I was going to say, sorry.
oh,
I think I avoided that weird goal. It was the same values.
this is why to take months off. And you didn't have enough on either the Zimmerman or the this or this. I'm just on warfare. And then here, yeah, it's supposed to be more, but the League of Nations came after. That was But the reason why you didn't have enough for either one. I realized that was pretty good. That's my plan. That's my good question. I was like, why are you combining these two? They're two separate reasons. If you would have put them separately and added them all, you would have got them all. And then not got the -8 in the other one. Yeah. I mean, it's not like a huge deal, but that's one. Oh, it's not a big deal. Oh, okay. Get the blinds. Get the blinds. Get the blinds. Make a difference. Alex, please. Please, Alex. Please. Please, Alex. Make yourself useful. Oh, there it is. Oh, shoot. I do this every time. I was starting to get it all set up and then I actually turned it off.
Yeah.
Oh, you laugh.
Say that all the time.
What?
Much more.
But we just like him. We got a better
This trial is the second.
Your Honor, I have here a 20.
There's the chief crucifier! There he is! You're bugging me. Honestly, like a nice picture of Charlie.
No, thank you, Mary. I already have an autograph one on my mantelpiece. Mary's a living example of what is wrong with immunity deals. Yeah, but on the other hand, without her testimony, I doubt if Closely would be in the death house. Yeah, but she's a killer, aren't she? She's running around the streets loose. Hey, oh, I'm talking about the second crucifixion. Yeah. Still, Vince, if it weren't for immunity, we'd be nowhere without Linda. Linda didn't kill anyone. We turn her free.
On trends to watch television. Change your clothing and meet.
We just go right quick. We're going into the lobby Alca's house. So it's good. You might get in the lights. All right, here we go. Take your notes out. Let's get going. And what's that? You know, I totally didn't get a chance. After I had a chance, I just did.
My answer to the last one is really good. Like for blue and green, you know?
Oh, okay.
I just remember that one time on an APUSH house, they wrote John help me
I think I thought it was funny.
I somehow don't get malaria in Apple letters.
Your Honor, he's had this information for a week. It's the first time we've heard about it.
I've introduced this at least 3 times. Objections from the defense continue. Terrence Millick, during a dispute with the prosecution, uses obscene language. Judge Older cites him for contempt of court.
By the way, contempt of court, you can go to jail.
He told me that there was a man and a woman tied up in the house, and that he had tied their hands and told them not to be afraid, that he wasn't going to hurt them. And then he told them, don't cause fear and panic in these people. Don't let them know you're going to kill them. And afterwards, they should hitchhike back to the ranch.
You say Mr. Manson gave you a wallet?
Yes, he did.
Did he tell you what to do with respect to that wallet?
He told me to take the change out of the wallet and wipe off the fingerprints. And then we were going to put it someplace where a black person would pick it up and use the credit card, so that the people, the establishment, would think it was some sort of organized group that killed these people, presumably the black militants. He said they wanted to show Blackie how to do it.
Order. The court will recess for 15 minutes.
I'm gonna have Yosti and Older killed.
Yeah.
Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3, testing.
So his whole truck could be a mystery. That's right.
Testing, testing. Do you read me? Over.
Coming through loud and clear.
Roger.
Vince, what is it?
Honey, now if they cut the phone wires, we'll have direct communication with the police. And come here. I got a full-time bodyguard, too. See?
It's like being in a war.
Yeah.
Hey, Vince, I want to apologize.
Oh, come on, Terry. It was a heat-of-the-moment remark. Just sorry Older found you in contempt.
No, that's not it. What I did was a hell of a lot worse. I'm the one who suggested that Everett Scoville be Manson's attorney.
You testified this morning, did you not, that you have taken LSD 50 times?
Approximately, yes.
What is LSD?
Lysergic acid diethylamide, something like that.
Was it a chemical? Does it provoke, for example, an emotional response like anger, fear, jealousy, hate?
Well, my sole purpose for taking it was for realization. God realization.
That was to discover God.
Yes.
Were you successful in that endeavor?
I realize you don't have to take peyote or LSD to discover God.
I believe you stated that you've taken 50 acid trips. Would you please describe what happened on trip number 23?
I object to that question, Your Honor, as being ridiculous.
Sustained.
What is this?
All counsel will come to the bench.
He showed it to the jury and it had to be admissible.
Gentlemen, we have a problem.
If the jurors have seen the headline and been influenced by it, grounds for mistrial may have been established. Therefore, each juror is questioned separately, under oath by Judge Older.
Do you feel that it has influenced you in any way?
No, sir.
Do you feel you can form an opinion based solely upon evidence presented to you in this courtroom?
I'm sure I can, Your Honor.
Very good. You may step down.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Do you feel that it's influenced your thinking?
All 12 jurors and 6 alternates state under oath that they have not been influenced by the headline and will consider only the evidence presented to them in court.
I didn't vote for Mr. Nixon anyway.
That was really
Now,
irresponsible by Nixon.
Mrs. Kasabian, you testified that when you saw the shooting of Stephen Parent, you went into a state of shock. Now, just exactly when did that state of shock end?
I don't know when it ended. I don't know if it ever ended.
Oh. And you weren't under the influence of any drugs, is that right?
No.
You weren't under the influence of anything, right?
I was under the influence of Charlie.
Oh, yes. Now, Mrs. Kasabian, I show you this picture.
Oh, God.
Oh, for God's sake.
Oh, God.
Mrs. Kasabian, the truth is that you made up this whole story, didn't you?
No.
Didn't you?
Nobody could make that. Nobody.
Mrs. Kasabian, why are you crying right now?
I just can't believe.
Believe what, Mrs. Kasabian?
That they could do that.
Oh, that they could do that. Not that you could do it, Mrs. Kasabian, but that they could do it.
I know I didn't do that.
Oh? But you were in a state of shock, weren't you? Then how do you know?
Because I know. I do not have that kind of thing in me to do such an animalistic thing.